Welcome to our podcast, Huddle Up with Gus, where we talk to guests about how sports help shape their life. I'm your host, former NFL quarterback Gus Frerotte, and I'm joined by my longtime friend and co-host Dave Hager. We are a radio.com original podcast, and you can find us on the new radio.com app or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. Now, let's get in the huddle. Hello, everyone, to another episode of Huddle Up with Gus. Today, the show is sponsored by the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in Los Angeles. If you have a chance to visit and stay, definitely go to the Westin Bonaventure Hotel. It's a great place to stay. Hello again, all you Huddle Up fans, and thanks for joining us on Huddle Up with Gus. Today, I am joined, as usual, by my sidekick and co-host, Dave Hager.
Yeah, I like the term sidekick.
You like it better than co-host?
I don't know. It sounds more fun.
Well, sidekick is great for our guest coming up.
Yeah, no pun intended.
No pun intended. But he was no sidekick.
No, he was Nick the Kick.
Nick the Kick. But another guest, Dave, who is just blows us away of their intellect, where they go to school, just his background. I mean, to understand that his dad was like running the CIA, and he really never understood that until he learned about it after he passed.
Yeah, they couldn't really talk about it.
Right.
It's like Thanksgiving was just like talking about the Lions game, basically, not what's dad doing at work.
Right. And then, it was great. And then his neighbor, he would play basketball with.
Yeah, Supreme Court Justice Whizzer White.
Byron Whizzer White, who was an NFL player.
Yeah.
Supreme Court Justice.
I believe won the Heisman.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a Steeler.
It was a Steeler, yeah.
But just, that's who you're like, I'm going to go home from school and shoot hoops with, the Wiz for a little bit.
Yeah. He called a lot of fouls, but whatever. Yeah,
yeah, you weren't going to go against him.
Yeah.
And then,
that alone would have been a great existence.
Yeah, exactly.
But then he goes and plays 18 years in the NFL.
Right. Goes to St. Albans and D.C., goes to Dartmouth as a baseball player and a football player, and then didn't just make the NFL, struggled.
Oh, there were some rocky steps early on.
And thought about just going right into politics, going to have a career in politics, and then the Chiefs called.
And he's a legend ever since. I mean, one of the most accurate kickers in the history of the NFL.
Well, yeah, and just a great story. And what was his favorite barbecue place?
Oh, Jack Stack in Kansas City.
Right.
Those are big words for those that are familiar with Jack Stack. We love Jack Stack.
We missed lunch today, so my stomach's growling a little bit for some Jack Stack.
Yeah, no, I had some Fruity Pebbles at midnight, but I'm hungry now.
So joining us in the huddle today, please welcome Nick Lowery.
Valet, stay, and play on your next getaway to Los Angeles. The Westin Bonaventure Hotel and Suites offers effortless access to all the City of Angels has to offer. Whether you're hoping to catch a concert or sporting event, our hotel is just moments from all the action and accessible to Hollywood, beaches, museums, and theme parks. The package includes a guest room and valet parking. For reservations, use promo code PSF in the code box when making your online reservation, or call 1-213-624-1000 and ask for promo code PSF.
Nick, so we want to hear a little bit about your story. So when you were young and growing up, I think you came over to the States from Munich, Germany. Is that right?
Well, actually, it may look like that. My dad was, I found out when my father passed away 10 years ago, my dad wasn't just senior CIA. My dad was chief of station in London. So he was literally the American M for, the James Bond types, if you remember the M figure in James Bond films. And so I was born in Germany because my dad was working for the CIA in Munich. We lived there for a year, but I've always been American, although my mother was actually an intelligence officer in the Women's Royal Navy in World War II, so I had that British background as well. But I'm American through and through, and honored that my dad served his country. And as you might know, with CIA, you can't talk about what you do a whole lot. So we found out more about my dad and how powerful and important he was, and that early post-war Europe, and the time of the Iron Curtain and the competition between the Soviet Union and the United States, and that's why I was in Germany.
Wow. We just interviewed last week Morton Anderson, who I held for 1 year with the Minnesota Vikings. So hearing his story and then seeing that, so we weren't quite sure. We might have two, but your story is definitely different than Morton's. And so tell us a little bit how you fell in love with sports.
I think we all know a lot of kids today that are sort of ADD. They're all over the place. And I think a lot of kids growing up, they're filled with energy. And I was one of those. And I just loved, I played music, I played drums, I played tons of basketball, I played soccer back in London when I told you my dad was chief of station there when England won the World Cup way back in 1966. I was playing soccer and rugby and cricket. And then I played a lot of baseball. I was actually a college baseball pitcher, and a guy named Harry Wilson became the father of Russell Wilson, was my baseball and football teammate at Dartmouth. So I played lots of different sports, and all of them were that outlet that we all need. And so that was, to me, as I look back, sports was helping me learn how to express my energy, to try new things, to adapt. Lord knows, to adapt to unpredictable things, to come back from, defeats as well as victories, and to express myself. So, and that's how you develop as a social human being too. When you move from school to school and suddenly you're an athlete, that gives you a little bit more reason to connect with other people. So I think that's sort of how it evolved. Just in Europe, moving to England when I was, came back to England when I was 9, and I was here, tall American, swanky Yank, as they called us at St. Paul's School in Kensington in London. And, how do you relate to kids that, you have a totally different background from? So sports ends up being that common ground that you learn to, get on the same team with.
Nick, we've asked this question to a lot of our guests, and we have a really high batting average on the affirmative answer here. When you were playing sports with the kids in the neighborhood, did you ever play wiffle ball?
Sure, of course I did.
There we go. Nick, we're hitting like 950 on that question.
Yeah.
Oh, you bet. You played wiffle ball, and then you played with a little, stick or with a tennis ball. I mean, anything. And of course, it builds your hand-eye coordination. You got to be able to react. And of course, with wiffle ball, it's a little safer, so you're not breaking too many windows.
Yeah. No, I think Nick's our first cricket player also that we've had on the show.
Yeah. What is cricket like?
You know what? I think I still have the record for the longest cricket ball throw. When I was 9 or 10, I threw it 70 yards and at St. Paul's. Cricket's different. You got to catch things with your hands. You got to catch a ball that's just as hard or harder than a baseball with your hands. It's spread out more. It's a 360-degree field, and you got to protect that wicket, right? So what the bowler's trying to do is bounce that ball in a weird way, fast enough and unpredictable enough that it misses your bat, hits the wicket, and you're protecting that, and it's not impossible to protect it. So some people, will score 40, 50, 60, even 100, 200 runs sometimes. And then you've got to be able to react because you don't know what angle it's going to come off. And the batter, there's no foul territory, so you can hit it anywhere you want. And the spontaneous grabs that these guys make are pretty amazing. Of course, it can be kind of slow, takes a while, and you got to learn to focus. Think about all those kids when they're 5 and 6 and they're looking at the dandelions in the grass. That's not going to be the sport for them.
No, I haven't watched a lot of cricket, but I've heard sticky wickets. What's a sticky wicket?
I have no idea. I would think it probably means that what happens is there are 3 poles that are stuck in the ground, and then there's a thing on top of it that's balanced. So you've got to hit the wicket, but the thing's got to fall off too. So maybe a sticky wicket is simply that it doesn't react quite and get damaged as much.
Right.
So, but I don't really know. It's been a while.
Or it has nothing to do with cricket. Maybe that I might be asking something I shouldn't be asking.
Maybe that was that same bar you were talking about before that the hockey player beat you up in.
Yes, that could also be that. That could result in a sticky wicket. Yeah.
So Nick, we talk a lot about the show of most of our guests have great stories about when they were a kid, and a lot of them talk about when they were young and they would go out and play with all their friends, and there were no parents, there were no coaches, there were no referees, and some of the stuff that you learned from those periods. What was some of that you took away from being a kid? You were in multiple countries, so I'm sure you learned a lot from different backgrounds.
Well, what sports does is it teaches you how to interact with other people, right? And so today, kids, they're always being supervised. So we weren't supervised. We had to develop our own rules. We had to be able to come up with a set of whatever you want to call them, rules, ethics, standards, so that you felt there was some level of fairness applied to everybody, and you had to figure out how to resolve disputes. So that's pretty darn important. And I think what happens today, when you compare what we had then, you might get into a fight once in a while. But not that often. But once in a while, there might be something like that, and you had to figure, maybe I don't like that. Maybe that's not the best way to do it. And today, if you're always waiting for somebody to supervise you, and the parents are worried that there's some molester out there, and so they never let their kids go out. I mean, we'd go out and we'd play in the where I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm from the D.C. area, so I was a Redskins fan. In fact, I kicked 2 field goals in the preseason, giving Mark Mosley a little break back in '79.
Oh,
so in Bethesda, Maryland, yeah. So in Bethesda, we were sort of in an area where there's some construction. So we'd go wander around, check out these homes, and develop that imagination. That's the other part, is your imagination has to have some internal machine. You don't wait for other people to stimulate you, other things to give you ideas. You have to come up with that. So, I think creativity and also the ability to relate to others, that was so important. So we were lucky that way. And you're not thinking you're lucky if you get in a fight with some tough kids from the other side of the neighborhood. Not that happened too often, but I remember at St. Paul's, I had a couple scrapes. And you have to learn, what is most important to yourself, and sometimes it has to happen in an intense environment like that. But I think that was really good for us. I think when you have to learn to adapt, and you have to meet new people and ask questions and find out what they're about, that's really important today. I think a lot of kids, you see kids with there's a suicide issue in this country. There's kids adapting really poorly to going to college, because they haven't had that experience that sports taught them, that getting out there, with strangers, taught them, not with any perfect textbook, but in that random way, you begin to figure out, here's a good decision, and here's a terrible decision,
right.
And I like the good decisions, and I want to do those more often. And let's look at what's going on in the NFL, man. You've got players that are incredibly physically talented, and yet they don't know how to handle their success. They're all being paid 10 times more than we were, so they're feeling their oats, but in the end, they often completely unnecessarily set fire to their careers, because they haven't learned those skill sets, and I think that's missing today.
Right. So, Nick, if you came home, you got into a scuffle with Jimmy down the street, and you said, "Hey, Dad, Jimmy, laid it into me today," and then the next day everybody would go, "Where's Jimmy?" Like, the head of the CIA can do some of that stuff.
Yeah. No one can find Jimmy anymore.
Jimmy?
Jimmy doesn't bother me. That's so funny. And I like Jimmy. I mean, I really did. No, I will tell you, I've done quite a few anti-bullying events, and I'll never forget, and this is not what I recommend, but there's a fine line between, you have to learn to honor other people, to have a sense of inclusivity. I think that's really important, as any team does. But there was this kid, and ironically, this is in Bethesda too. There's a family called the Gross family. And this kid, Gross, would come by and he'd punch me around, and I was only 5 or 6. I didn't have any skill sets. I didn't know what to do. I was never taught to be violent, never taught to fight.
Right.
And so I came back to my older brother, who was 5 years older than me, Mark, and I said, what do I do? He said, next time, punch him in the organs, which he meant the stomach. And I didn't know, what else to do. So this kid's coming and he's going to do the same old thing he's done before. So I just punch him as hard as I can in the stomach. And there was this 2 or 3 second pause where he sort of like could not believe what had happened. And then he burst out crying, ran home, and he never bothered me again. Now, I'm not saying that's what you do in bullying, but I am saying to some degree, you got to stick up for yourself, not hurting other people, but that was one of those early lessons. Now, did I get into more fights? Not a lot. And I'd like to think most of my life today, and I think you guys probably echo this too, is about figuring out how we can all get along better and develop better and use this stage as athletes, this wonderful spotlight to help other people and make the world a better place. I mean,
right.
It's never been a brighter spotlight than it is today.
No, that's true. And you probably weren't getting many fights in Bethesda, right? That's not like the north side.
Not too many.
Yeah. But that was a place the Redskins, they would never tell us to stay out of Bethesda. But like some of the other places, like don't go wandering around RFK, right? You don't want to be in those neighborhoods.
Yeah, exactly.
So Nick, you're playing as let's say you're in middle school now. Are you playing soccer on the soccer team and other sports, or when did you start with football?
So I went to Potomac School in McLean, Virginia. So I was playing soccer. I played baseball, and when we were 9, we went to England. So, but before that, I was playing soccer and baseball, and I don't know if I was playing any basketball at that point. Then went to England, played those British sports, and soccer and rugby and cricket, and actually did some swimming and some track. And that was kind of neat too. But there's another subject altogether, which is, there's so much pressure on kids today to focus on one sport like they're little pros, and it just skews the purposes away from enjoying sport, learning the lessons of sport, loving participating, just being engaged, and making it this sort of mini professional league. And then we came back to the States, and I was playing baseball. I was MVP of the basketball team, and soccer and football. I just started to kick field goals just like I had in England, and wow, I was pretty good. And it really became a process. I'm sure Morton talked about this maybe a little bit, where physically there's the action you do, a quarterback that throws the ball and the handing off and all the different skill sets, but it's also the mental side, learning and noticing how you handle people expecting a lot from you, learning how to relax under pressure and how to focus. When I talk to kids today, it's definitely a lot about concentration, learning to focus when you're bored, learning to focus when you're exhausted. And so all these different sports, I think, teach a different part of your brain how to focus, how to work through being completely, incompetent as a skill set when you're new to a sport, and working through it, loving the hard work, So I loved baseball, went to St. Albans School right by the cathedral in Washington, D.C. in 10th, 11th, and 12th, and was MVP of the baseball team. We were league champion. I had an 0.78 and 0.39 earned run average. I thought I was going to play pro baseball. Wow. And I had a smart coach, Gary Gardner, wonderful coach and a wonderful mentor, and a guy named Dick Johnson. And so I just focused on punting and kicking. I was not a very good wide receiver anyway. And, in the end, I played college baseball, but there was that link as a pitcher between that and the kicker, where you're on an island. You got to learn how to focus. You got to learn, spotlight's on you, get it done. Manage your state, manage your mind and your nerves, and that's really, to me, a lot of what we're learning in education is, where do I put my mind? How do I resolve a situation and learn about it and then make good decisions?
Well, I would assume that there are similarities between like a closer and a kicker, because as you see,
exactly.
You guys are called up with 2 seconds left in the game, but you may not have kicked the ball the whole fourth quarter, right? And then all of a sudden you got to go out and win the game.
Exactly.
You've been kicking into a net and thinking about things, and then you got to be able to focus and go out there and put everything, make it all white noise, and go out and just focus on putting it through the uprights.
And also hero or goat. You're put on the spot. You can win the game or lose the game in people's minds, especially. There's not a lot of, he had a mediocre kicking game. It was either, I kicked the game winner, or no, he missed that and we lost.
Well, Nick, as a holder for me and all the years that I played and holding all those years, no one ever knew that I held until I screwed it up.
Right.
Right. And so that's got to be hard. But
Exactly.
I do see those similarities. So you went to Dartmouth as a baseball player.
And a football player, yep, I did. And by the way, just to connect, just a few days ago, Greg Zuerlein, one of the better kickers in the NFL.
Right.
And he's kicking off crushed rubber, which is a little bit more mushy sometimes, and he doesn't come through, doesn't attack the ball just slightly, kind of comes off it a little bit early, and he loses that little hook, that 2-3 foot hook, which would have brought that inside the upright, and they lose a game they really should have won. So, it's tough, man. You go to bed, you wake up at night a few times, literally dreaming that ball, hook left,
right.
Damn it, go through. And you live with it, but then I think you also realize this is only because I care, I give a darn, and so then you use it to motivate yourself to get better. This is the way any athlete does. You learn to use the adversity to get better. I had a terrible game against the Cleveland Browns. I mean, and the field conditions were horrendous, but it doesn't matter. All I thought was, I'm never going to feel this feeling again. And it made me, I went in the 90s, that was in 89, and it was a tie game. Marty Schottenheimer's return to Cleveland, important game, and I kicked a 41-yarder with 4 minutes left to tie it, but and then I missed a couple kicks, and I felt horrible. And I just said, I'm never going to have that feeling again. And I kicked 86% after that in the 90s. It was the most accurate kicker in the 90s in the NFL, as well as in the 80s. And that was coming from adversity. That was coming from feeling horrible, letting my teammates down, and there's going to be days when you aren't perfect, and learning to live with your humanity. There's another thing. No matter how good you are, you're not perfect, and that's just the way it is. Tiger Woods, no matter how good you get, you're going to have moments, and sometimes if you're not careful, they turn into years. And there's the other thing, the guys that have that ability to not let something brand them for a lifetime as being a loser, but just to keep learning, keep growing, keep working.
So what was experience like at Dartmouth as an Ivy League football player? Like, who is Dartmouth's biggest rival?
Well, when I got there, we had won 5 straight Ivy League championships. They had a guy named Bob Blackman, who still is a true legend, who's sort of like the John Wooden of the Ivy League back then. And Jay Cradhamel had replaced him, and Jake played, and it happens that way. I love Jake. He was great, and he was an honorable man who went on to be a tremendous athletic director for Syracuse, actually. But he was different, and there was such high expectations, and we had a talented team, but we kind of played not to lose rather than to win. And you've probably been there before, where you're playing not to make mistakes, and that in the end, that's not where all the best energy is. But right. I will say this: playing in the Ivy League, there really was a commitment to academics. They understood that it was not for debate. And I got to give him credit that. So our big rival, I had my best games against Harvard. Harvard and Dartmouth and Princeton are probably the best teams right now, I guess. And Buddy Teevens, who was my holder briefly, he's been their head coach twice in the early 90s, and now he's their head coach again. It was great. And, speaking of what sports does for you, as an example, Dartmouth College started to ask the question, with all these concussions, what are we going to do? And we challenged, thanks to Buddy Teevens, challenged the Thayer Engineering School to develop a robotic dummy. And that robotic dummy can run 20 miles an hour, runs a 4.740. It's 200 pounds. It's all the weight is mostly in the bottom of it. But teams, about 16 or 17 NFL teams use it now. And instead of practicing head-to-head, where there are the collisions that can cause these concussions and later CTE potentially, now they've got an option, and it works really well. Teams that use it, Dartmouth got the entire Ivy League to be the first league to vote to eliminate teammate-on-teammate tackling. And, that's kind of a subset of what we're talking about, man. We're trying to help our little brains grow, and they can't grow if they're getting pounded. Yet at the same time, you don't want to hurt the game itself. And Dartmouth's defense was getting 4 and 5 times more tackling practice because they didn't have to worry about getting hurt. And so that's an example of what it was like at Dartmouth. Instead of just saying, hey, this is the way it is, a level of innovation. And Dartmouth and Buddy Tevens, and the MVP is what it's called, the mobile virtual player, won the Innovation Award at the Super Bowl in Houston a couple years ago from GE and the NFL. So,
I remember that.
That to me that's kind of cool about Dartmouth is, and Ivy League schools is, using, learning to use your weaknesses and turning them into strengths. I think that's what happens with Ivy League players is they may not always be physically as good, but they do tend to not make mistakes and repeat them quite as often.
Start your day sunny side up at the Westin Bonaventure Hotel and Suites and enjoy breakfast for 2 on us. No matter how you plan to spend your trip to Los Angeles, start every day with a hearty meal to kickstart your morning. Enjoy breakfast for 2 on us for each day you stay. For reservations, be sure that promo code S4B appears in the promo code box when making your online reservations at Marriott.com/LAXBW or call 1-800-228-9290 and ask for promotional code S4B.
So did you play both sports all 4 years of college?
No, actually, I stopped playing baseball after my second year. My wonderful coach wanted me to change my motion, and it just wasn't. It hurt and didn't work too well. So I just said, this is what I got to do. I'm going to focus on football. And next year, I actually took ballet in the summer with some of my teammates. It felt like a hippo, a rhinoceros in the ballet class, but then I was a more graceful hippopotamus that season. And that was the first year in NCAA history the kicker never missed any extra points or field goals. And that was my junior year. So I knew that was I had a shot at playing in the NFL. And it was harder coming from an Ivy League school because you weren't scouted as much. You didn't have, quite the level of pressure. But in the end, it worked out.
What was your most memorable kick at Dartmouth?
My sophomore year, I hit a 49-yarder at Harvard that could have cleared by 20 yards, and then I hit a 52-yarder at Dartmouth against Harvard the next year. So there's a memorable one. And I guess my senior year, I had a 41-yarder to beat Holy Cross, in the last seconds of the game, and it was kind of rainy. That was a good memory.
Yeah, that's great. You know what? Some of the things you were talking about with that MVP is really nice because I wish it was more affordable when I was coaching high school because I hated if we were practicing, and you have to learn how to tackle the right way. And sometimes there's no other way to do it than to tackle. But if you lost a player in practice because of that, and those kind of tools and technologies that they created at Dartmouth are really good for the game. And really good just you can tackle as many times as you want. You're not going to hurt yourself or hurt that machine.
Yeah, and the funny thing about repetitions, I always find it interesting on special teams. A lot of teams, the model is in practice, you practice a new play 2, 3, maybe 4 times. But, on a special teams, when you're doing an onside kick like the Chiefs had last night, and it's literally those plays decide the game. I mean, those are game-changing plays. You should practice that a few more times. And, repetition makes a big difference. That's one of the things that the MVP does. I'm really proud that Dartmouth has done it. They're developing a smaller version so that, Pop Warner can get into it. A lot of, there have been a lot of kids parents have made their kids play flag football or another sport. And now, there's going to be an opportunity for them to learn to constantly tackle in the right way. By the way, what's happened to tackling in the NFL? I mean, it's terrible. Guys don't know how to tackle. Seattle's a good tackling team, but not too many others.
They're just trying to strip the ball now.
Yeah, they're trying to create turnovers. But I used to show my kids in high school, when I coached in high school, a highlight film, not a good highlight film of Troy Polamalu. Because he used to come up from the safety position, never break down, just tried to make the big hit, which he was really good at, but if he missed big. Instead of, I said, right, this is not what you want to do. You want to break down, and then I would show him, like, there were some really good tacklers in the NFL who always broke down and made the play. And besides that, it protects them as a tackler. because when they're out of control, anything can happen. The game is crazy and it's really physical. And, those kind of things are so important. So, Nick, you leave Dartmouth, you go on to get into the NFL. What was that transition like for you? I know it wasn't easy, so tell us a little bit about that.
It wasn't easy. Yeah, well, I grew up in the time of Watergate. My senior year in high school, those Senate hearings with Sam Ervin and Howard Baker and those amazing legendary figures. By the way, open air, not like these private things you see now with nobody. You had some time in D.C., buddy. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, these hearings where they aren't televised anymore, which I don't like, But I grew up in the Watergate era, and I wanted to make a difference. Who grows up next door to Byron Whizzer White, Supreme Court Justice for 31 years, led the National Football League in rushing for both the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Detroit Lions, led the NFL in rushing the same year he finished number 1 at Yale Law School. That was my next door neighbor. And so, you grew up
you ever
with
have
a
a
conversation
conversation
of
with
making
him?
a difference. Oh, hell yeah. All the time. We not all the time, but we did quite a bit. And I played basketball with him. We had driveways where we had basketball hoops in both driveways. And one time I played with him against my two tall brothers and Nancy White, his daughter, who was Stanford's Athlete of the Year, with a guy named James Lofton back in like 1977 or something, or 78. And Byron and I beat those guys, and then the next day he never complained. He was playing in his dress shoes, just come back from the Supreme Court. He took off his tie, and we played basketball. And the next day he's on crutches with a car picking him up next door, but he would never complain. He was one of the toughest SOBs, and yet also one of the greatest minds. And so I had this interesting thing where I got cut I almost made it with the Jets. It wasn't really tough enough yet, and missed a couple field goals in the third preseason game. And they cut me, then went up to Dartmouth. I was going to be a drill instructor in French, and the Patriots kicker, whose name was John Smith, was injured, showed up there, convinced them to take a look at me in the fading light at what was called Schaefer Stadium in Foxborough back then. And I got the job, and I played 2 games for them. The first game ever was the first Sunday night game on national TV with Dandy Don Meredith and Howard Cosell and Frank Gifford against the Raiders in Oakland. And we won that game and went down to the final seconds. Howard Cosell was going, "There goes the tall, angular one from Dartmouth College. Can he handle the pressure?" And I was pooping in my pants, man. I tell you what, I could not handle it. It was a process. That's why I'm so passionate about, what we've talked about is sports teaching you to hang in there and love the work. And so I went through a process of being cut by 8 teams 11 times. I then would work for Senator John Chafee of Rhode Island in the United States Senate in between seasons, and then came back and went with Cincinnati, trying out with different teams. The Redskins that second year kicked those 2 field goals in the third and fourth preseason game. And I'll never. This is a good story. I was working out at St. Albans. The Redskins had cut me the week before. We'd gone down to Atlanta, and I'd hit a field goal, and then I'd missed an extra point, which I never did normally. And I'm worked out. I've kicked. It's hot and humid it gets in Washington, and somebody's running over from the tennis court saying, "Hey, Bobby Beathard, who is the general manager, legendary general manager for the Redskins, wants you to play for the Redskins tonight." So I drove home, changed, took a quick shower, drove down to the stadium, and gosh, what was the name of that defensive back? I came to the locker room like with 2 hours left. I signed a quick little contract, and they go, "Man, and we practice all week. He just shows up for the game." And and Theismann helped for me. He was great. He was really positive. And that began a friendship with him. And kicked a field goal, missed another extra point. Ironically, I went on to have the highest not only field goal percentage but highest PAT when it went to 20-yard extra points in history. But I hadn't made that adjustment to kicking without a tee. And when you're kicking off the ground, you got to dig down, sort of like kicking hitting a wedge shot out of the sand trap. You have to dig a little deeper, and if you're not careful, you don't open up your hips and you leave it high and to the right. And I remember running off the field at RFK Stadium. These two guys wearing Redskins jerseys were leaning over that dugout, and I thought, and they're smiling, and I'm running towards them, and they go, "Lowery!" And I looked up, and they go, "You suck!" Yeah, those are the special memories. But you know what? It just makes you better. And you know, I wasn't ready yet. I was getting there. I was beginning to outkick kickers. I was getting stronger mentally and physically. And then I got a job. I was going to quit. I got a job working for Senator Bob Packwood on a permanent job on the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, working on aviation deregulation and aviation safety. And that was it. I was not going to play anymore. And I got a call from the Kansas City Chiefs, and I literally kind of hung up on this guy, Jim Shaw, because he just had back surgery, and it was the wild card weekend. I said, I got another great job, but maybe another time, who knows? And then as I hung up, I thought, damn, I didn't find out what they had to offer, but I didn't know where to find this guy. I didn't know how to spell his name, did not know his phone number. There was no, network of Verizon and T-Mobile, et cetera. Yeah. So I came back to his hospital room and blew him away that I could find him about an hour later. And I just knew I'd always wonder if I didn't find out what they had to offer. And they flew me out a week later in snowy Kansas City. They gave me a $2,500 bonus. And for those people that are listening, today that would have been a $100,000 bonus. But back then, I just needed something to make me try one more time. And I thank God I did, because, in the end, I played 18 years. I beat out Jan Stenerud, who went on to be the first kicker in the NFL Hall of Fame, broke and shattered all of his records. He had a career 67%. I was 80%. He was the first guy at 80%. I had the most accuracy in the 80s and the 90s, most 50-yard field goals. None of that would have happened if I'd given up. And so many people give up one step away from greatness. And the greatness is not a postcard. It's not a snapshot. The greatness is loving the work every day, working to get better, never being good enough, never being satisfied, but at the same time, loving the process. I think that's the sort of initiation you go through when you get cut 11 times by 8 teams.
Right. So you go to the Chiefs, and, I'm sure you were going through training camp and saying, okay, I still got to figure out if I'm going to make this team. When did you know that, hey, I'm going to have a job here this year?
You know what? They brought me in May, and May 1st, I drove out, and with that big $2,500 bonus, I bought a silver Volkswagen Scirocco with a spoiler and a good stereo system, and I drove out on Route 70 all the way out through Dayton, Ohio, all the way out through St. Louis down to Kansas City. And that month of training in May helped me get less intimidated. And because, if you just show up at training camp and you're a rookie or you haven't made, and I had 2 games under my belt, but still, it's different. It's much better when you get that early exposure to your teammates, to the environment. And I just knew, I talked to one of it was the Chiefs conditioning coach, and he's like, you're just going to have to outkick this guy, get ready to outkick this guy at everything, every day. And so I set my mind to that, and that's really what happened. And last night we had Brian Waters initiated into the Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Fame, one of the great offensive lines of all time with Willie Rofe and Will Shields and Brian Waters.
Right.
And Clark Hunt was there. Clark Hunt was a 16-year-old ball boy charting me every field goal against Jan Stenerud. Right. So what happened was I just began to, Jan started to get a little frustrated, and I got the ball off a little bit higher, a little bit faster, and it averaged 107 degrees in Liberty, Missouri, at William Joe College that summer. It was, we had long practices, man, 2 long practices, full pads. I like the way it is now. And so about the 3rd, 4th week, I knew it, and the sign was a very special one. I came back to my room and pulled up the covers, and I had fresh, warm cow manure with worms in it and grass all over my bed. And I knew that the guys that, Jan was sort of the father figure. He was the oldest guy on the team.
Right.
And he was 36. He still played 7 more years, but I knew I must be getting close if they were going to do that. And a week later, they let me do all the kicks against St. Louis, and I hit my kicks, and they cut Jan out to the third preseason game. And Marv Levy, who had been special teams for George Allen, we were lucky to have him. He appreciated it. He took that really, really gutsy move. I mean, how do you cut a Hall of Famer for a nobody? I was really happy to prove him right. And in my first field goals in the NFL, my very first one was a 50-yarder. And then in the fourth quarter, with 8 minutes left, we're at midfield, and I told Marv, let me try this. And I hit a 57-yarder that hit halfway up the net. So it was an NFL record, 2 50-yarders in the game for the first time. And just made a big statement, basically saying, maybe this guy's got some staying power. And it took staying with it long enough, and then being in the right situation, having a coach like Marv Levy.
Right. So you go on to 3 Pro Bowls and 18 seasons in the NFL. I mean, that's amazing after that, hearing that story. And it just goes to show you that you have to think back to when you were a child and you're playing all the games and all the different sports and what it means. And I think we grow up and you had another opportunity to have a different type of job. But sports, I think it just somewhere inside you just says, I love to compete. I love this chance to go out and be on top. And you're at one of the hardest positions, because if you miss any of those kicks, you're not going to be there in the next year. Yeah.
And Stanford would say that too. You're just 1 or 2 missed kicks away. And that's the thing you got to live with. So it teaches you, here's another word, responsibility. It teaches you 2 things, accountability and responsibility. And I know you know this as a quarterback, because, making excuses, nobody wants to hear it. And so making an excuse as a kicker, it just doesn't work. You just have to figure out, how do I find a way, even my bad kicks that they go through. And that's what and practice. I've practiced at extra narrow goal posts, all these things. So when you get on the field, you are ready for anything. So you practice as if it's coming down to you. You have no excuse that you're not ready for that situation, because that's what you're paid to do, is be ready in those situations. So you just rehearse it in your mind, in your heart, in your nose. What's it going to smell like? How am I going to be in that moment? And rehearse that and like that process of what I call healthy pressure. And that's how you get better. I think that's really what the Patriots do, by the way. And that's what Pete Carroll does. I think you got to make it like game-like conditions and help your players, take some responsibility for it.
So playing over all those years, though, I can't imagine the holders that you had coming through there. Did you have a certain routine you like to put them through? Because I know when I held for Morton, that's the first time I ever held for a left-footed kicker, and we filmed everything. I mean, we went over and over. He's like, I like a big ball straight up, and I can still remember him drilling me. And I'm like, Mort, I'm like 12 years in the league at this point. I'm like, I get it. Just tell me what you want and I'll do it. You know what I mean? But we had to film it, and he had to make sure, because just like he had a lot of holders. I can't imagine how many you had as well.
I had about 15 holders, but I had about one for every year. But I also had, streaks where I had Bill Kenny for a while, I had Steve Pallure for a while, I had Steve Fuller for a while, and I had Brian Barker. So, but in between, I had Ron Jaworski, and I had Steve DeBerg, and all these different guys. And so it's really interesting. When I first started, I thought there had to be like a mystical relationship with your holder, sort of magical chemistry.
Right.
And by the end, it's just who's going to enjoy doing the work during practice. And if you do, you can get pretty good at it. But you got to be precise. And you only get, some coaches only give you 1 team field goals a week. And I told Marty I had to have 2 a week. And don't do it 4 or 5. Make it 10 or 12, because that muscle memory, frankly, for that field goal protection unit also helps a lot. Otherwise, you're exhausted, you're in the middle of the game, and now you got to do something very different. And those kicks, they always matter. I mean, look at how many extra points, just the missed extra point changes the game, changes the notion of, that particular game and the script of that game. Every kick matters. And so, Morton was precise, and now I tried to be precise too, and do whatever it took to be ready for any situation.
Do you think that the kickoffs will change again? Because I don't know how much they're adding to It seems like that almost is taken away from the game a little bit.
Yeah, kickoffs are kind of strange now. I mean, back in the 90s, they moved it back to the 30, and I'll never forget I had a strained patella my last year with the Jets, and I had actually my second last year. Is that right? No, my last year with the Jets. That's right. In '96, and I'm trying to kick the ball off into the end zone, 70 yards, and I actually averaged to the 1 yard line with a strained patella with a 4-1 hang. I was pretty proud of that. But now that would have been 4 yards deep, now the balls are broken in by a quasi referee figure,
right?
And so they're
no more putting them in the dryer.
Yeah, so that makes a big difference. That helps, and you can see it. I mean, kickers are better today overall. The training's better. The field conditions are better, but the ball's easier to kick too. I mean, if you look at the average net punt, the average kickoff, average field goal, the long field goals, they've all gone way up, and that's definitely helped.
Nick, what's the biggest difference between kicking for the Chiefs and then going to the Jets? Like that's a change in scenery for sure.
Well, that was a big change, but that was also kicking for Marty Schottenheimer and Joe Montana and Marcus Allen and Derek Thomas, and a team that went to the AFC Championship game, and a confident team. I was just talking to Bruce Arians, who was one of our coaches with Marty, and now, of course, is Tampa Bay's. And he's a similar kind of coach. We had confidence as a team. We had cohesion. We had toughness. Went to the Jets, and we had Pete Carroll. So it was pretty cool because you had a young coach. He hadn't learned everything he needed to learn, but he had the positive energy, which is what you got to have playing in New York, and stuck out there at that point on Long Island. And we were really good going into December of 1994. We had Boomer Esiason at quarterback, and we had Art Monk and Ronnie Lott. We had some guys that were legendary leaders, each with their own style. But for some reason, we kind of fell apart in December, and they fired Pete. Now, if you're asking me what it was like with Richie Kotite with the Jets, oh my gosh, God bless the guy. He was not a good coach, and that's when it began to fall apart because the general manager, Dick Steinberg, also died of cancer. So the two main guys that brought me there, and the general manager and the head coach, the guys that create the culture of the organization, along with the owner, they were gone, and that was really horrible. We had the worst record in the NFL the next 2 years, and it was as dark a time as you can imagine. And you have to learn a lot from that too. Who's going to run for the hills, who's going to keep working, who's going to stay loyal, who's going to make excuses. And it's tough. It's tough. It's great in New York when you win, and it's just as bad when you lose.
No, that's true. I played 1 year in the Bengals, and I know what it's like in the dark times. So Nick, now you've gone through your career. You play with the Jets. You're seeing that. Hey, I played a long time in this league. Got a lot out of it. What was your next transition like for you?
What are you talking about after my career?
Yeah, after you got done, like we all go through that as athletes. We're like, okay, I played 15 years, and then what am I going to do next? You have a background in being on in Congress and working with these people and being in politics. Did you understand that that's what you wanted to do, or you just said, I'm just going to figure this out as I go? What was that like for you?
Well, first of all, I didn't. You don't write your own script. And you try to, and you do everything you can to, but then you realize that some things are not always in your control. You just do the best you can. And, I had knee surgery on my right and left leg, hoping to come back. And then I thought it was pretty much over, but I kept training, not kicking, but training. And out of the blue, in 2000, Dick Vermeil calls and said, hey, we need you to come in for a tryout today because our kicker, Jeff Wilkins, has ironically, a strained patella. And I found out later, by the way, my knee had a torn meniscus, not a strained patella. So there's another example of playing for a bad team. I was misdiagnosed with a much more serious injury. Played my last 11 games of the season with a torn meniscus. But having said that, I'm healed up, and I outkicked three 25-year-old kickers and almost kicked the Rams in that famous Super Bowl for Dick Vermeil against Tennessee in Atlanta. And but that didn't work out. To this day, I don't know why they didn't have me on the sidelines, because if he'd been injured and he missed his first 2 field goals in that game, I would have been there. But I thought it was time, and I went up. I was invited. I read a lot of poetry, and I was invited to read my poetry at Harvard. And I went up there, and I thought I'd been doing a program called Native Vision, which I started in '96 with the NFL Players Association, Clark Gaines, and Allison Barlow, and the people at Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. And I was really fascinated by why Native American populations have not moved on as much as they could, and have not been as healthy and as vibrant. How do you revitalize that? And so I met with the head of the Harvard Native American program, Robin McClay, and he said, you know what, you should apply to the Harvard career program. And so I did, and I spent 2 years at Harvard, got my master's in public administration at the Kennedy School of Government.
Wow.
And we had 199 people in our program, 100 Americans, 99 from 80 different countries. Just a fabulous way to just, put an exclamation point on your NFL career and move on to something else. And that felt really good to do that. And I actually, that first year I did 3 games for ESPN, which was asking a lot while I was doing studies. But then after that, I'd done 3 years of college football for ESPN and the ABC. But then just really enjoyed that. That was about leadership. And I developed a leadership program for Native youth that I've been doing for 20 years, and just looked at how do we develop into healthy human beings? How do we find our purpose? God's given us all unique gifts. How do we find that? How do we live with that sense of mission in our lives? Tony Robbins calls it live with passion, but, live with mission too. What do you want to do with your life? Don't just have unbridled desire, but have it focused on something that makes a real contribution. So that's where I am today, and I love the work I do with helping kids find their purpose. We have a program called Champions for the Homeless, and have a bunch of NFL players come. David Craig comes quite often, and Larry Fitzgerald. We have it on Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter and in the summer, and I've never seen kids transformed, kids that are 6 and 10 and 12, just seeing how they can help a homeless person feel some purpose in their lives and some sense of love and reinforcement. And kids, to me, that's the divine power everybody has. And then once you realize you have that, now what am I going to do with it? And that program has just exploded, and we love that program. And sort of an offset of that is helping homeless veterans, and we're doing a major summit with the president's director of the Prevents Task Force on suicide prevention, because you probably heard there's officially a 22 suicide per day rate for veterans, which is just so unspeakably wrong. And it's actually, we believe it's actually closer to 27 a day. It's not going down. It's actually still going up. So we're doing a big national town hall with Dr. Barbara Van Dalen, who was one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world a couple of years ago, and getting the governor and getting Senator Sinema and Governor Ducey and experts on PTSD and drug abuse and addiction and mental illness and financial strain, and just thinking all the different things that these incredible soldiers that have given everything, suddenly things are taken away from them. And as Clark Hunt said to me last night, the owner of the Chiefs, I think you relate to this, Gus. I mean, it's not the same. We didn't put our lives on the line, so to speak, but we put our bodies on the line, and we had an immense pressure. And once that's taken away, it's hard. Suddenly all those things disappear to some degree, and that transition's really, really difficult. So if NFL players can help veterans kind of join hands and say, hey, we're in this together, and we have some unfinished work to make the world a better place, that's where I'm at.
So can everyone find that through your foundation?
You can go to nicklowry.org, NICKLOWERY.org, or you can spell out nicklowryfoundation.org, either way. And there's a donate button there, and we do that in Phoenix, but we're talking about doing it. We're going to do a big fundraiser in San Francisco, and there's a huge homeless issue there, and in Kansas City. And to me, it's not just helping the homeless, it's helping ourselves too. I mean, the funny thing about and I'm sure you've done it tenfold, is how often you feel so much better about your life when you've, left your comfort zone and helped other people. It's just part of the recipe for a balanced life.
Exactly. I know that I've, talked to Eric Hipple a bunch and listened to him speak about suicide prevention and everything that he's gone through in his life. And I'm not sure if you've ever heard Eric speak, but I know he speaks to several military organizations and to their soldiers about that, and how powerful or what are the signs, things like that. It is powerful and it is important. My son was actually in a movie. Dave, you got to see it last night, about suicide. He was a lead actor in a movie called Solo Orange. Wow. Yeah, he was a lead actor in a movie called Solo Orange, and it was put on by the school, William and Mary. The producer of the show, Isaac Davis, it was his best friend who committed suicide. They've always wanted to make movies, so Gunnar got the lead role. It's a very powerful thing, and now my wife and I want to take it out to college campuses across the country, show it, and create a program to help kids, because we know that suicide is a problem and there are ways out, and you need to talk to people. And it's good when kids can see themselves in somebody else. And so it is powerful. It's great that you're doing that, and everyone can go to nicklowry.org and follow Nick and please donate and help him out in his cause. I think it's a great thing that you're doing. Is there anything else that you're doing right now that we can help you promote on our show?
Gosh, I would just like to share that. What are the chances that your son is starring in a movie about suicide prevention, right? And just the serendipities of life. I think, some people call it the power of intention, the law of attraction. But when you get your values aligned, these coincidences happen more often. And it's a beautiful thing. And it helps you realize maybe we're doing our thing and God's helping make sure that it happens even better. And that's where I think the richest experiences of life happen. And they only get better. I really believe that we've got this divine or this eternal, whatever you want to call it, whatever religion you are, inside us, this sort of filing cabinet of how great it feels to make a difference. And, I like to think, having grown up next door to Byron White, and who was close friends with John F. Kennedy, that whole vision of asking, as he said in his inaugural address, what you can do for your country. That is where you sow the seeds of a life of happiness and impact. And you get over yourself. You don't let you, in the end, us athletes have to fight that battle to learn to overcome our ego and let our spirit transcend. And that's what it's all about.
No, I agree. And so, Nick, one of the last things we love to do on our show, we have a little segment called No Huddle, where we go through a 2-minute drill and we fire a bunch of questions at you. We kind of like to have a lot of fun with it. So okay. Dave always starts us off.
Okay, Nick, if you were NFL commissioner for a day, what rule change would you make?
I would allow CBD, non-toxic, non-THC CBD to be a regular part of the players to make their brains more neuroplastic. That's one of the things I'm working on very passionately, is reducing concussions and the power of CBD to help with joints. We've had amazing results with people like Christian Okoye and Eric Dickerson and Derek Kennard, and that would be something I think that could help protect the game. You can make a great helmet. It's never going to be the same as an inner cellular helmet, where the neurons in the brain literally are 5 to 10 times better at resisting impact.
Right. Great. No, I agree. So what is your biggest pet peeve?
Continuing to make the same mistake over and over again, not listening and just making the same mistake. I try to be patient, and maybe my thing is patience. Maybe my pet peeve is learning to be more patient, but learning, paying attention, that's really how you get better in life. And, I'd say that's what it is.
Right. All right, Nick, if you were making a Mount Rushmore of kickers, and feel free to include yourself, but if you were going to chisel that out of stone, who would your 4 kickers be?
I'd definitely be one of them. I'd say Jan Stennard, Morton Anderson, and then I'd say Vinatieri and Tucker for the Ravens. He's just extraordinary.
Tucker's unbelievable.
Yeah, he crushed the Steelers.
Oh, he's just so deadly.
That's a great one. What is your favorite sports movie?
Risky Business.
Whoa.
It's not really a sports business, but there's Tom Cruise. He's a football player, and I'm not sure. I'd say Remember the Titans is a great one. There are a lot of great sports movies.
I like it. I got to interview Dave Hansen from Slapshot. Oh, that was so much fun. That's my favorite sports movie. I don't know if you've ever seen Slapshot, the hockey movie with Paul Newman.
Was that with Paul Newman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, that was a good one.
All right, Nick, I used to work for a company that was based out of Kansas City, and the discussion at home office was always, what's the best barbecue in Kansas City? I always heard like Jack Stacks, or there's like 5 or 6 that always get thrown around. What's your favorite barbecue out of?
That's so funny. That's so
KC.
funny because you just said Jack Stack. I had Jack Stack as my pregame meal yesterday.
Yeah, I always heard about Jack Stack.
I'm with Jack Stack.
Yeah, it's solid.
He would have it now as his pregame meal, but when he was playing, you couldn't eat Jack Stack before the game.
No,
yeah, that would not.
No,
work.
that's not what that would not be what I'd have before game.
As a fan, what's your most memorable sporting event that you've ever been to?
Oh man. Well, I actually went with Tony Robbins to the Stanley Cup playoffs. That was really fun. The Stanley Cup championships when the LA Kings were big back in like 91 or whatever year that was. That was see the Super Bowl is pretty cool. But I don't know if you feel the same way. But if you're not playing in it, I'm not sure it's really as fun. You can watch it on a 4K television with your friends. And when you're a player, you played all those years. It's just watching the game and not being there. It's just not the same. So,
yeah.
And I went to the 7th game of the NBA. I went to the 7th game of the NBA championships in Oakland a couple years ago. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not a big fan of going to the Super Bowl, but I've taken my kids. Ryan Fitzpatrick and I took our boys a few years ago when it was in Minnesota. We had a lot of fun, but I didn't really, the game didn't really matter to me. I was just there with my kids, and they were enjoying the whole thing.
All right, Nick, if you could go back in time for a day, step into the time machine, where would you go and when would it be?
Time machine for just anything. Where would I go?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, I've always admired Winston Churchill, and my mother's side of the family, having that British roots, I just, to have seen what it took in England with all of Europe taken over by the Nazis, except for England, 26 miles away across the English Channel, and to have, to be able to watch him under the circumstances, find a way to rally what was by every single view pretty much hopeless. Wow, that wouldn't be bad. I wouldn't mind going back to the time of Jesus and just being able to witness how one person could change the world. That would be pretty fantastic, just to witness the truth of that.
Yeah, without Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, he changed the world.
Right.
Just think about that.
Yeah.
The people were writing books and stories about this man and how significant it was and has been to our world and society.
All right, Nick. And I thought of this question on the way to the studio today because there's some real bad ones. But what's your least favorite sports cliche?
Oh gosh.
I'll start it off. I'm so sick of hearing "next man up" when they're like "next man up." I don't know if I buy "next man up." I think it's a good thought in your head.
You know what? I know what it is. It's we'll get them next week. Shut up. Get them today.
Yeah.
Man up today. Don't get them next week. Get them now, man. This is your day. I mean, George Allen, the future is now. The future is now is a hell of a good cliche, man. This is it. This is the only time we got is right now.
Right. All right, Nick, last one.
Anything
Who's your favorite band? What's your favorite music group? What do you like to listen to?
Oh man, there's so many. You know, I love the Beatles. I love John Mayer. I love Eric Clapton. I'm actually pretty close with Santana. The lead singer of Santana is a guy named Andy Vargas, who's a good friend. I just was there a couple weeks ago to see them perform. So I'd say Santana right now. They're awesome.
That's a really good one.
They're battle tested.
They are battle tested. Hey, Nick, man, we really appreciate you. I'll let you know when it comes out, and hopefully you can help us and retweet it, reshare it on social media. And,
Absolutely.
It was great. We learned so much about you today, and good luck with everything. And
Hey, I'll do whatever you need me to do, guys. I really appreciate it.
All
Thanks
right.
for what you're doing.
Thank you, Nick.
thanks, Nick. Have a great
Bless
day.
you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We want to thank you for listening to Huddle Up with Gus, a Radio.com original.
You can find our show on radio.com, the new radio.com app, or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Please leave us a review or comment if you enjoyed the show.
We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Huddle Up with Gus. You can also visit us on our website, huddleupwithgus.com.